All right, tonight's book that we're going to read for you, this is a Robert Munsch book that's called Alligator Baby. You ready? Here we go. Alligator Baby by Robert Munsch. One night, Christian's mother woke up and yelled, "A baby, a baby! I'm having a baby!" Christian's father jumped up, zoomed around the room, got dressed, grabbed Christian's mother by the hand, ran downstairs to the car, and drove off really fast. Vroom! Unfortunately, they got lost. They didn't go to the hospital. They went to the zoo. But it was okay. Christian's mother had a lovely baby. They drove home and knocked on the front door. Blam, 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 blam. Christian opened the door, and there was her mother holding something all wrapped up. "Christian," she said, "would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Christian. So Christian lifted up the bottom of the blanket. She saw a long green tail and said, "That's not a people tail." Christian lifted up in the middle of the blanket, saw a green claw and said, "That's not a people claw." Christian lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a long green face with lots of teeth and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." Now, Christian said to her mother, "Don't be jealous." Just then the baby reached up and bit Christian's mother on the nose, and she yelled, "Aha!" Then the baby reached up and bit her father on the nose. He yelled, "Aha!" "That's not a people baby," said Christian. "That's an alligator baby." "Goodness," said her mother, "we've got the wrong baby." So Christian put the alligator baby into the fish tank, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. They came back in an hour and knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. Christian opened the door, and her mother said, "Would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Christian. Christian lifted up the bottom of the blanket, saw a fishy tail, and said, "That's not a people tail." Christian lifted up the middle of the blanket, saw a flipper, and said, "That's not a people flipper." Christian lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a face with whiskers, and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." Now, Christian said to her mother, "Don't be jealous." Just then, the baby reached up with his flipper and flapped her father's face. Whap, 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 whap. She yelled, "Aha!" It was a seal baby. "We've got the wrong baby." So Christian put the baby seal in the bathtub, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. Then came back in an hour and knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. They said, "Christian, would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Christian. She lifted up the bottom of the blanket, saw a very hairy leg, and said, "That's not a people's leg." She lifted up the middle of the blanket, saw a very hairy arm, and said, "That's not a people arm." She lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a very hairy face, and said, "That's not a people face. That's not my baby brother." Now, Christian, said her mother, "Don't be jealous." Then the baby reached up with its feet, grabbed her mother's ear and her father's ear, and they both yelled, "Aha! It's a gorilla baby. We've got the wrong baby." "Let me do it," said Christian. So her mother and father put the gorilla baby on the chandelier in the living room, and Christian went off to the zoo on her bicycle. First, Christian looked at the snake cage. No people's babies. Then Christian looked at the wombat cage. No people's babies there. Christian looked at the elephant cage. No people's babies there. Then she stopped and listened. From far away, she could hear, "Wah, wah, 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 wah." "That's more like it," said Christian. She followed the sound. It was coming from the gorilla cage. Christian looked at the mommy gorilla and said, "Give me my baby brother." The gorilla jumped away and wouldn't give the baby back at all. Then the people baby reached up and bit the gorilla on the nose, and the gorilla yelled, "Ah!" and handed the baby to Kristen. Kristen jumped on her bicycle and pedaled home. Kristen knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. When her parents opened it, she said, "Would you like to see your new baby?" Kristen's mother lifted up the bottom of the blanket and said, "Look, people's legs." She lifted up the bottom of the blanket and said, "Look, people's hands." She lifted up the top of the blanket and said, "Look, a people's face." Kristen's mother picked up the baby and gave it a big hug. Her father took the baby and gave it a big hug, and her mother said, "Kristen, Kristen, you got the baby back. Good for you." "But what are you going to do with all the other babies?" yelled Kristen's father. "There's a seal baby in the bathtub, and an alligator baby in the fish tank, and a gorilla baby hanging from the chandelier. We should take them back to the zoo." But Kristen looked out the window and said, "I don't think we'll have to do anything at all." Look at that. Look at what's going on. And everything was okay until Kristen's mother had twins. That's the story. I hope you enjoyed.